Ben Golliver. And if you would have said this about a month ago, we probably would have said, what do you mean by that? Well, things have kind of changed, and Ben Golliver is writing about it over at the Washington Post, and he joins me now, their national NBA writer. Things are changing for sure, Ben, and I think this Ben Simmons thing is probably going to be an interesting and possibly ugly saga, as training camp is September the 28th. So we'll start with that, Ben. September the 28th, Ben Simmons in Philly or gone?
Well, I would hope for everybody's sake, including the Sixers' sake, that he's gone. But I think you're right. I mean, we've got ourselves in a real saga. I think it's already a saga. I mean, when you see a player as high profile as Simmons making as much money as Simmons does in a situation where it's so obvious to everyone that he needs to be moved, and it drags through the entire draft, all of free agency, all of August, and now into September, and he hasn't been traded yet, I think I qualify that as a saga. And I'm sure you've seen those reports saying that he doesn't want to show up to training camp like you mentioned, and that he wants to be moved. He feels like his time at Philly is over. That's a full-fledged saga to me, and it's a real mess for Sixers management.
Okay, so obviously Simmons has kind of hinted he won't show up to training camp. Daryl Morey has been in this spot before, though. So is this a stare down that Morey blinks, or does he just kind of smile and say, well, then don't show up?
Well, it's an amazing situation for Daryl Morey because he's been the beneficiary of stars wanting to move throughout his career, right? James Harden wants a bigger platform from Oklahoma City. Boom, he shows up in Houston. He becomes a franchise player. Chris Paul wants out of the Clippers. Boom, he shows up in Houston, with the sign and trade, and Daryl Morey benefits there. But there was one situation where he had to trade a star on a short timeline like this, and that was when he traded Chris Paul for Russell Westbrook. And I look at that move really as, the worst move of Daryl Morey's career. And it's a tough spot to be in when you don't have the leverage. When the star wants to leave, when the star needs to be traded, when there is a tight timeline, you've got to operate, on that timeline. You don't always get the best trade value. And I think that's the real problem. It's a game of chicken here. Daryl Morey doesn't want to have to make a bad trade. Clearly, if he had a good trade, he would have already made it by this point. And yet at some point, it's going to come to a crossroads. I just don't see any way you can bring Ben Simmons back into training camp if you're the Philadelphia 76ers. I think that's bad for your organization, bad for your locker room, and bad for everything else. I saw Joel Embiid's comment recently, trying to kind of smooth things over. But we heard how they really felt after Game 7 against the Atlanta Hawks. Joel Embiid said the turning point of the game was Ben Simmons not taking that layup or that dunk. Doc Rivers questioned, is Ben Simmons even competent as a championship quality point guard? I mean, these are, kind of personal comments to be hearing in what to me was like the lowest moment of Ben Simmons' career. So I just don't think you can unburn that bridge. I think it's done, and they've got to find a trade here. Even if it's not a great trade, they've got to pull the trigger and move forward.
Okay, so is Ben Simmons – this is where it gets interesting. Ben Golliver, Washington Post, is with us. Is Ben Simmons a tradable player under these circumstances? I mean, the fans here, they're split. Many of them who don't like Simmons think there's no value. He stinks. He doesn't shoot. Well, then there's other people who really appreciate him and say, no, you got to get Dame Lillard for him. So there's got to be either a middle ground. This isn't an easy one. What's the value around the league?
Yeah, I mean, that second group, they got their head in the clouds. I mean, you got to bring them back to earth. You're not going to get Damian Lillard, a top 10 player, for a guy who can't take a free throw, shoot a three-pointer, and doesn't want the ball in his hands in the clutch in the playoffs. I mean, you could absolutely forget about that. Look, there's going to be trades available. There's going to be someone who sees the talent that his fans and his defenders see. The incredible all-league defense, the versatility, the great passing, the skills in transition, and say, look, he just needs to change the scenery. He needs to be in a place where there's not nearly as much scrutiny. And to me, when you're watching Ben Simmons play, he's in his own head. A lot of this is mental, and I think that the relationship with that Sixers fan base is absolutely a factor. I was in the building for Game 7. They were booing him. They were all over him. It's very difficult to perform in those situations. Now, he's being paid handsomely. He needs to step up and do that. But there's an awful lot of situations around the league that would be better for Ben Simmons, the player, over the next 4 years of his contract than Philadelphia. In fact, I could make the argument Philly might be a bottom 3 spot for him right now when you're looking at Joel Embiid always being the fan favorite. He always eats first in terms of how the offense is structured. Ben Simmons needing to fit around him. what I would say is a pretty close to toxic relationship with the fan base. And then a coach who said after Game 7 that he didn't really believe in you. That's a tough situation for a player in his mid-20s. There's a lot of spots out there that would be better than that for Ben Simmons. And here's the thing. He'll probably have bigger numbers if he gets traded because he's going to have a bigger role. He'll probably have less pressure if he gets traded because there's not that built-up history of the playoff failures that he had in Philadelphia. And so to me, again, I think it's in his own best interest to be moved as quickly as possible. And for Philly, how do you try to make that right? How do you just welcome him back to camp in 3 weeks? It makes no sense to me. You've got to move forward. And if you can't find the trade, I would say just stay home. Keep him away. That happens every once in a while. And just go forward with the group that you have.
Ben Golliver from the Washington Post, as you mentioned, he makes these comments, reportedly that it's not up to me to improve my trade value. Is he right about that?
Well, in most situations, it's always up to the player to play as well as possible, right? This is a very unique situation. Everybody turned on him. That was a team loss, by the way. Embiid with 8 turnovers in Game 7. Danny Green's injured. Tobias Harris doesn't rise to the occasion. Doc Rivers doesn't coach a great game. They should have beaten Atlanta. There is no excuse for them having lost that series. And they all wanted to scapegoat Ben Simmons and put it all onto his shoulders. And I can completely understand Ben Simmons and Rich Paul, his agent, seeing how that whole situation played out and say, come on, guys, like you squandered any goodwill that there possibly could have been to put this thing back together when you allowed that situation to play out that way. So, there are holdouts. Obviously, they're going to have the opportunity if he doesn't show up. They can potentially suspend him, withhold his paychecks. There are those kinds of tactics that they could go to if they wanted, but that's only going to reduce his trade value even past what it was right now. And so I go back to actually the James Harden situation in Houston last year. The lesson from that one, trade early rather than trade late. The longer you wait, the trade value diminishes. You're not going to, generate this amazing bidding war out of nowhere if he plays well for a month. Everyone already knows that the secret's out of the bag. People know James Harden was upset last year. He made that very obvious. And people know that Ben Simmons is upset with his current situation here. There are no secrets right now. So that's why, again, you don't want to rush into a horrible deal, but if you've got a decent deal, take it. That's my stance.
All right, Ben Golliver from the Washington Post. So if you're in this situation, which doesn't sound great, is Daryl Morey the right guy to get you out of it?
Absolutely. Look, I think he's one of the best 2 or 3 executives in the league. I did mention earlier he made a really bad trade, the Chris Paul for Russell Westbrook one. It's one of the worst trades I've seen in the NBA the last 5 years. But he's made some of the best moves and some of the best roster construction that we've ever seen. And he also made a great move this summer by extending Joel Embiid and getting him to buy into that program and solidifying that guy as your franchise player for years going forward. Now when he's out there, trying to pitch free agents, trying to construct trades, trying to retool this roster, he can tell those other types of superstars, look, Joel Embiid's in place. You know who you're playing with. We know whose team this is, and we're going to be a consistent playoff team year in and year out throughout Joel Embiid's prime. So he's a very, very skilled negotiator. He's also got great connections around the league because he's made just dozens and dozens of trades over the course of his career. So if I was a Sixers fan, that would be the least of my concerns. I would feel very comfortable with Daryl Morey in that spot, especially compared to the past regimes that have been there, where I think you can really look to a lot of blunders, over the past, say, 6 or 7 years. With the previous regimes, I would feel much more confident with Daryl Morey.
So I guess the question, Ben, now becomes, he said he doesn't want to be here. He doesn't want to report. Essentially, everything's fractured. So what kind of value does he have?
Well, look, you're going to hope in a best-case scenario you're getting kind of a second-tier star. Now, look, I was already, mocking this idea of Damian Lillard. I just can't see that in any situation, and certainly Portland has not telegraphed any indication they want to trade him. But a player like a C.J. McCollum from the Blazers, I think that's kind of the guy you would be hoping for if you're trading kind of quote-unquote star for star. If not that, then you're looking for the kind of package that, players like Harden and Chris Paul have returned in past trades where you're getting – a few competent rotation players, and you're getting future draft picks that you could potentially spin off into other trades where you're bringing back some rotation guys. I think it's tricky in the NBA right now because it's all super teams, right? Look what the Lakers are trying to do. Look what the Nets are trying to do. If you're the Sixers and you don't get a star back for Simmons, it's very difficult to say, hey, look, Joel Embiid and a modest cast of characters around him, starting with Tobias Harris, is that really a title contender? Now, me personally, I would say no, but that's got a team that's got a chance to reach the conference finals. And for me, this organization, they've got to walk before they can run. You can't become so obsessed with this idea, we've got to get a star-level player back for Ben Simmons. You haven't even made the Eastern Conference with your finals with Joel Embiid yet since he's been there. You've got to do that first before you can dream of winning a title, right? So to me, if you get one of those kinds of packages where it's a second-tier star or it's multiple rotation players and draft picks, at that point, I would be willing to pull the trigger if I was Philly.
It seems, Ben, and I know, by the way, the article is over at the Washington Post. He says there's only one way out of the Ben Simmons saga for Daryl Morey and the 76ers. It's a really good piece that you can kind of get some background on what Morey's done and how it's gotten to this spot. Because some would say, Ben, that that Doc Rivers went out of his way to protect Ben Simmons this year. Hey, he told the media, you guys ask these ridiculous questions about him shooting. He's a treasure. And the one time that he stepped out, it seems that Ben is holding that against him. Should Ben Simmons do what Joel Embiid said? Hey, they booed me, and I took it to get better. Is Ben Simmons handling this poorly? Well,
look, pressure busted pipes on that situation, right? It was a masterful job by Doc Rivers last year to try to build up Ben Simmons' confidence, to try to get him comfortable, to try to get him the national acclaim, potentially being in that Defensive Player of the Year conversation. It was obviously calculated for months and months, but when it really came down to it, when it was brass tacks time, Doc Rivers was right there with Embiid saying, we lost this series because of Ben Simmons. I would remember that moment if I was Ben Simmons far more than I would remember the previous praise because, you're going to the playoffs, you're going to war together. Do these guys trust you? Clearly they don't. And that's why I say the only way out of this is you've actually, it's a tricky spot for Daryl Morey because I know the fans are against Simmons. I know a lot of the media is against Simmons. I know what Embiid and Doc Rivers said at the end of the playoffs. But for Morey, the best way to maximize Ben Simmons' trade value is actually to work with Ben Simmons and Rich Paul to find him a destination that he really wants to go to, because if you're trading him against his will to some small market he doesn't want to go to, you're just going to get a less back in return. And usually now these kind of big star trades in the NBA, they're collaborative. It's not just the team giving up on a player. It's a team working with the agent to find the best landing spot so you can kind of maximize that return value. We saw that with the Anthony Davis trade, by the way. The GM who didn't want to trade Anthony Davis to the Lakers, he got fired. He got replaced. The guy who showed up traded Anthony Davis right where he wanted to go and got a pretty decent return back for the New Orleans Pelicans. So to me, that's the way you get out of this. It's got to be less confrontational. It's got to be less angry and two guys sitting at opposite sides of the table, and it's got to be more collaborative. That's how you solve the situation.
Well, Ben Golliver, Philadelphia loves a nice saga, loves a nice drama, and it seems that we have one here. September 28th, the Sixers report to camp. Will Ben Simmons be there? Well, probably not. We shall see. Ben, we appreciate it, man. Great story.
All right. Take care, man.